How's it going, comic book fans? Welcome to another in-depth and quality comic book review on Comic Drops. On today's episode, we are discussing the concluding issue of Rye, the Book of the Dark. With the amazing potential of a Master Darque versus Bloodfather, magic versus technology war, does this concluding issue do this concept justice? Or is this series relegated to be a puppet of the Dark, only to be a shell of its former glory? Stay tuned to find out. First up, let's discuss the narrative of Rye, the Book of the Dark, issue number 2. Alright, the first thing to consider is that this is Dan Abnett's conclusion to his run on Rye. You would think that this would be his swan song or his magnum opus, but this issue is overall disappointing at best and does not live up to the potential set by the first issue. This issue opens up right after the events of the last. The dark woods have Rye and Raijin strung up and left for dead. The theme of magic versus science is reinforced here as Rye and Darque discuss the merits of each. All the while, Rye and Raijin are communicating telepathically, planning to escape their current situation. I really like this thematic decision, and it could play into a bigger overarching mythos for Resurgence. At least I hope it does. We also find out that a mysterious man created both of these forces of magic and science. According to Darque, he created both of these because he wanted to control the world, and he knew one or the other would work. Then Darque wants Rye to submit to him, to tip the tide of the war in his favor, and in an act of desperation, Rye and Raijin release the Bloodfather offsprings they've collected to create a nanoswarm, or as I like to call it, a convenient plot device. I don't know where this is going, but this is a red flag for me. Weak sauce so far. This nanoswarm destroys the vines holding our heroes captive, and they fall into the dark pit below, which leads to the desert. Yeah, okay. I didn't see that one coming. After realizing that the Darque has not affected this area of the Earth, they also realize that their data is not cloaked, whatever that means, and set off for further adventures. And all of a sudden, a portal opens, and here comes convenient plot device number 2. And the Valiant fans out there can whip out their checklist at this point. You're either going to be really excited or really frustrated and mad. I mean, here's who shows up out of this portal. Eternal Warrior, looking comically bad. War Mother, Lula, who is now Spylock, Geomancer Karana, Sai, and the Shadow Woman. And this is where everything starts to fall apart. But first, all of these characters were introduced during the 4001 AD limited series, and that series is one of my favorite event series in all of comics. However, the problem lies in how these characters are utilized throughout this issue. You'll see my point in a bit. Now, after their family reunion, the Darque attacks, and we get our obligatory action sequence. We get to see the Shadow Woman and the Geomancer fighting side by side. Rye and the Eternal Warrior and even Sai and War Mother join in. In fact, we get to see Shadow Woman go giant and stomp on dark creatures. It's actually pretty cool. And just when this ragtag group of heroes is about to be overwhelmed, Karana the Geomancer opens another portal, everyone jumps through, and Shadow Woman hits her staff on the ground, sending out a purple shockwave that destroys all the dark creatures. We then learn that the portal leads to the Hinansho free fortress that is off-world and a safe haven for our heroes. Lula then shows Rye to his room and expresses how important Rye is to their fight and the overall conflict with Bloodfather and Master Darque. Rye then pledges his everything, whatever that means, to her calls, and then out of nowhere, convenient plot device number 3 enters Rye's chambers, namely Ivar the Time Walker. He introduces himself and tells Rye that he needs his help because, and I quote, "My thing is really important." Oh Lord, this can't be happening right now, Valiant. And then Rye responds, "I have to save the world." with Ivar quipping, "So do I, and we'll do mine first." He and Rai teleport out of his quarters just to leave behind the whole conflict he was in, all the heroes he was just reunited with, and everyone that was depending on him to turn the tide of the Howling War. And that's pretty much it. We do get a small epilogue that confirms that Dr. Silk is in 2024 at this time, and that Rai has essentially been brought to him by Ivar. But then we're told that Rai's adventures will continue in... oh my gosh, Valiant, why do you do this? The Valiants. Yay! Overall, this issue's narrative was created solely to get Rai from 4001 to our present time and absolutely nothing more. I was right with my previous prediction. There was no way that this series would live up to the potential that it set up in its first issue. Absolutely no way. This series was always at the mercy of the Resurgence event and nothing more. Ultimately, this is another example of Valiant and Alien books checking off boxes to include characters, but not really doing much with them. The characterization in this issue was non-existent. The narrative was boring, and I really wish this was not the culmination of Dan Abnett's run on Rai. All these characters deserve much better, especially Rai. This book is a bridge to another series, and nothing else. Next, let's take a look at the visuals of Rai, the Book of the Dark, issue number 2. Just to remind you, I did not like the visuals of Rai, Book of the Dark, issue number 1. And seeing as this series is stuck with the same creative team as last issue, I figured I would have the same opinion of the art in this book, but I was wrong. The art in issue number 2 has gotten worse, and that is a testament to the rushed nature of the visuals in this book. With Emilio Utrera on pencils and colors, essentially pulling double duty, he must have just ran out of time. As the issue progresses, the art seems to get worse and worse, culminating in some of the ugliest art this side of Faith Returns. I mean, this is Valiant's first original character, and the powers that be give him this kind of treatment? I just don't get it. In this book, characters are not drawn consistently again. We have another artist who has a phobia of drawing hands, and facial expressions are laughable at best. The most egregious example of this is the Eternal Warrior. This is hands down the worst looking Eternal Warrior I've ever seen in all the years I've been a Valiant fan. Here, just take a look at some of these shots. This is your drunken Uncle Eternal Warrior. How did this get past the people at Valiant? Who at Valiant looked at these pages and said, "Yep, that looks great. Great job, Emilio." I can't imagine anyone approving of this design unless they were rushing this book to production. That's the only explanation in my book. And the sad effect of this low quality art is that it diminishes the impact of these characters returning. Eternal Warrior wasn't the only character to receive this treatment either. Every character looks awful. Just take a look at these shots as well. Now, not everything is bad on the pencil side of things, however. The variety of shots incorporated in this issue is impressive, and it's nice to see close-ups, medium shots, and wide shots used to emphasize reactions and the action taking place in each panel. But it amounts to slapping high-gloss paint on a turd. It's still a turd in the end. The same principle can be applied to the colors of this issue, also done by Emilio Utrera. They are a strong point of this issue and really help build an interesting atmosphere and visually interesting experience for the reader. But the pencils are so bad, they sabotage these qualities as well. Again, it's still a turd no matter how you dress it up. Overall, the art in this issue gives me the same impression it did with the first issue, only worse. This feels like a rushed, wry coloring book that just happens to tell an incoherent story to check boxes for the fans. And I hate to say that, because Rai and these other characters again deserve better. And lastly, of course, the trade dress is excellent, with a cardstock cover featuring art by Al Baranuevo and thick interior pages. Okay, let's summarize my thoughts on Rye, the Book of the Dark, issue number 2 by Dan Abnett and Emilio Utrera. This issue is really a mixed bag of disappointment. The pros of this issue are the colors are nice, and Emilio used a variety of shots in each panel with the art. Lastly, the trade dress is good as well. The cons of this issue are the story is uninteresting, Valiant is just trying to check boxes at this point, the art is almost as bad as Faith Returns, Eternal Warrior's design is the worst I have ever seen, and this series only serves as a bridge to Resurgence and nothing more. Overall, I knew this series would not live up to its potential the moment I finished reading issue number 1. Unless the Howling War is brought into play during Resurgence, I feel like this was an opportunity for Valiant to do something truly unique that has been horribly squandered yet again. So that wraps up my review of Rye, the Book of the Dark, issue number 2. I knew after I read the first issue that there was no way this series would live up to the potential that it had. Ultimately, disappointing in every way, this comic only served as a springboard to get Rye over to the right timeline for Resurgence. Let's hope the character is done justice in that series. Of course, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know what you think about the conclusion to Rye, the Book of the Dark. Check your pull lists, and I'll see you at the next one when we take a look at the questionable Ninjak vs. Roku issue number 1.